everyone, welcome back to the Book and Life Podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping in shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge to vilify the immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the guard and the order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks around every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests.
So, guys, I promised you a fantastic author, and boy, have we found one today. She is new, she is shiny, she is amazing, and she will just blow your socks off into the moon. It is the book of the year as far as I'm concerned. You gotta get your hands on it. But before we talk about the book, I want to all of you to invite and welcome into your hearts the beautiful Hester. So how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks ever so much for having me on the podcast.
It's an honor. Like, I saw your book and I was just so excited. So tell everybody about it. Tell them, like, what's it about, and where did you get the aha, I've got to write this story moment from?
Okay, so to start, it's called The Beholders, and it begins, we find out that the aristocratic wife of an MP is accused of murdering their baby son, and she's on trial for it. But the story begins a few months earlier properly, and it's told completely through the diaries of a housemaid who goes to work for them at their estate. And that's
Wow.
Harriet, who is blown away by where she's ended up, this grand house with just beautiful things in it. And she doesn't seem very much of the master at first, but the mistress is this compelling but erratic woman who has an extraordinary singing voice and sings. So Harriet's surrounded by all this incredible art and music. But she begins to realize that something isn't quite right. There aren't really enough servants in this massive house, and they're all beautiful as well, whereas Harriet isn't really by Victorian standards. And they all seem surprised and quite hostile that she's there. And there's also, she notices that in all this beautiful artwork, some of the paintings, they have quite sinister hidden meanings. And her mistress, Clara, although she's this compelling woman, she's clearly alienated from her own child. There's weird things going on. So Harriet decides she doesn't want to go home and marry her childhood sweetheart, which is really what is expected of her. She doesn't really want to be a housemaid either. So she really becomes kind of enthralled with the situation in the house and tries to find out what's going on, and soon begins to regret that because it's quite dark.
Of course, yeah.
And it's all about, there's a lot in it about power and how power can present itself. So it's not always what it seems. And the idea for it actually was a real surprise to me, because I didn't mean to write a historical novel at all. I had this big idea for a novel that was set in the present, and it would have a historical subplot, which would be a diary sort of ticking along in the background. But my main character was this present day woman whose life falls to pieces, and she ends up traveling through North Africa. So very different. But I started writing the diary, and it just took over. Once Harriet's voice started motoring, I couldn't get her to shut up. And I just realized that, yeah, it's weird, isn't it, how it takes control. And I realized that, yeah, this story, this backstory was actually much bigger and probably more interesting than the one I'd had in mind. So I just decided to go for it, just throw the rest out, and ended up writing. And so now I'm a historical novelist.
But that's the way,
plan, but great.
No, it's never the plan. Like when I started, I thought, okay, I didn't want to get into wrestling. I'd grown up with wrestling. I'd grown up with wrestlers all my life.
Oh, had you?
And yeah, like honestly, it's like little and large. You see this little 5'1.5" chick that's skinny like a snake, like a rail, just a rail. And then you see these like 6'3", 7-foot tall giants next to me, and they're like 300-400 pounds. And you think, what on earth am I looking at? And I was the writer, and they were the performers, and I would be, I was a little bit like Napoleon. So they all knew where I was at any given time. In fact, there was this guy that I worked with, and every time I came in a room, he went back out the nearest door, essentially, because he knew that if I was coming to talk to him, it was because he'd screwed up. So he would always be checking to make sure if he'd screwed anything up, because he didn't want this 5'1" woman, bringing him to tears in front of the rest of these, very manly men.
Wow, so about power coming from unexpected sources.
Exactly, and that feeds into what you were saying. And so when I started, I was writing romances, and my publisher came and she's like, why don't you do something with wrestling? You've got a lot of wrestling, support, wrestlers that you like, you're friends with. And so I joined up with my co-writer, Joey Legend, who's one of the most legendary trainers in wrestling. He trains some of the best out of Europe and Africa. He's just constant. And we ended up writing Marie's World, and it was the same thing. Like, we had planned to do this huge family story, and it's twins turning on each other. One's famous, one feels left out, so the other one publishes her twins' diaries to get back at her, and this becomes this huge entangled web. And before I knew it, I'd given every single character their own book, the main group their own books, so that they could tell it from their point of view. And it became like a spider web. And I never ever thought about doing contemporary fiction. I was like, I'm a romance writer. That you can do them as standalones. And then I realized, actually, I can't write a standalone. I'm a series writer. And the more that I kind of have done over the last sort of 14 years, the more I realized, actually, this is my voice, this is my style, and I'm sticking to it. But I managed to create a subgenre in sports romance that never existed, and it's kind of weird because it's sometimes sports romance and it's sometimes contemporary fiction. So it's kind of like the two clash together, and readers really get something unique, and it's never, it's not been done before. It probably never will be done again. But
yeah, that's really interesting.
To me was just like totally took me by surprise. It was never the intention. And I think that's the wonderful thing about writing, is that you can do that, and you can have that experience in life. I will have to get you a copy of Marie's World. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it, and you'll be like, you'll get all emotional about it. Most people do. But it's just like, it again, that's looking at power, because in wrestling, power is something that they're all in a way searching for. The champion is the one with the most power, because they're the ones that have got the company on their back, and they're pulling it into the next chapter of their story.
I mean, there's so much drama and theatre in wrestling, in that world. It's such a great place to explore for fiction, those stories. And
if anybody's looking to really understand the smaller elements of wrestling in a really honest way. There's a show called The Wrestlers on Netflix right now,
Mhm.
and the trainer Al Snow, who is a very good friend of mine, is on there, and
Oh,
he
great.
breaks himself and he breaks his heart because he really believes in this wrestling company that he's helping and he's working with, and to see the side of him that's not the performer. Like
Mhm.
everything on that reality show is him. Like
Mhm.
his passion, his push, his drive, things he does for the people he trains is all legit. And I think again it shows him, like he shows them how to take their power
Mhm.
and hold on to it in a world where essentially they're all trying to outdo each other just so that they
Mhm.
can stay on the card and stay ahead of everything. And I think what he teaches is really amazing. So that's
Yeah.
something you can have a nosy about, around when you're sitting on
Yeah,
Netflix
absolutely. It
needing
sounds
five
like
minutes to
very
chill out.
interesting
Yeah,
dynamics.
and I mean, and that's the weird thing. Like, I look at the wrestlers I know now, and I think, wow, like I'm just a small girl from a small Scottish island. Like, how is it that I'm here and I know all these different people, but um,
That's
writing
what's
takes you
great
some crazy
about,
places.
yeah, yeah, well, that's I love in fiction when it really takes you somewhere else and you know that the writer knows what they're talking about, whether it's their
Yeah,
own experience or they've done the research and have found those details that really bring a world alive. And when you can go somewhere that you just wouldn't have gone with it, that's what it's all about.
it's an amazing journey. Like when I looked at your book, I was like, oh, this is another Catherine Cookson, but better. Like I loved her work growing up as a kid. Like I wasn't
Mhm.
supposed to read it at the age I was reading it because my nan was like, whoa, that's not what you're supposed to be reading. Here, have this children's book. Um, but it was the first book I read, being dyslexic myself, and
Mhm.
knowing Catherine is dyslexic. I didn't have to correct it in my head. I
That's
could just
great.
read it, you know, and I
Wow.
wasn't having to slow down. I wasn't having to worry about it. And I adore her work for that reason. There's some of the short stories I'm like, not really sure where you're going with this. But when she does the actual big novels, I just find the world creation and the research and the dialect and the language she puts in there, it makes you feel like you're physically there watching it or you're physically there
Mm.
experiencing it. And that's what I got from yours. And that's why I'm super excited to review yours because I'm like, another great one. Like I've been almost like my entire reading career since I was like 9 or 10, been searching for that person that could replace Catherine. And I found a fantasy writer that was really close, and her name was Rachel Kane, who's sadly passed away now.
Okay.
But I've never. You're like the closest one to that
Oh
I
wow,
found.
that is. I will thank you so much. That what a
And
compliment.
you know,
Thank you.
and I don't give out compliments willy nilly, and people really have to earn it. But I feel like that with yours, like when I pick it up and I hear that it's coming from the housemate, and it's told from such a unique humanized angle. I mean, that was like what got me excited about it. I was like, this is why I wanna read this book because this is connecting me into the people that I understand, the hardworking ones, the ones
Mhm.
that are essentially forgotten about. Like they're the
Mm.
flies on the wall and they see everything and
Exactly.
they hear
It's
everything and
yeah.
that
They are the
that was
ones
inspiring.
who see what's going on and can tell the
Yeah,
story. Really, they're the best placed people. Yeah, it's partly why I called it the beholders. That idea of the people who can actually see, who know the truth, who know the whole story, aren't always the
yeah,
ones that are in the spotlight at all, and they're also not often the people who can't say what's actually going on for whatever reason.
yeah,
I found that interesting in my book that she discovers the truth, but to protect other people, she can't actually do what she wants to do, which is expose others. And then there's that
yeah.
whole question of complicity and how far do you go and what's the right thing to do, which is really interesting.
And I love that too. Like it's such a unique era to explore too, because it must
Mm,
be the internal conflict that she goes through, just like trying to understand, like, well, what's my place in this? What can I do? What can't I do? And
mm,
then almost being torn over that,
mm,
like that to me is great. And actually, I was just thinking there, Tracy Reese's she just did a beautiful historical about a Polish painter and
Mm.
this girl from high society and how she falls in love with the painter, but the painter's technically using her for his own
Yeah,
ends, and then her
yeah.
life is completely just falls apart, and it's the butler in training that kind of saves her and
Uh-huh.
saves the day. I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it's not coming to me. But it's a great example of how we're now focusing on the staff and telling the
Mm.
story from the staff or the younger points of view for stories like
Mm.
this. And I think in a way we're all kind of keeping Catherine going by doing it that way. And I think
Mm.
she would appreciate. I think she's chuckling up there in heaven,
Yeah.
being like, oh, see, all
Hopefully
those
sending
years
some
I doubted
inspiration down.
myself, and here I am sprinkling my magic into the historical fiction. And I think she was a big part of moving that forward. And actually, a writer that I got to know fairly recently, she did Self Control, which was actually the inspirational novel for Jane Austen.
Ah.
So Jane Austen's sarcasm, her wit, actually came from this writer, and I'm trying to remember what her name is, and I'm going to look it up because I don't want to get this wrong. But she really inspired. Like she was not known. She was a pastor's wife in Orkney,
Mm-hmm.
so she was not known to anybody. Um, and she was just this unknown person with this. You can tell she's got dyslexia, and it was just moving. It was
Mm.
so moving to read this story, and it was talking about control and obsession and how
Mm.
men at that time could be like that and there was no consequences for it. And it was like this
Exactly.
was like hundreds of years before like that was even being discussed. Like,
Mm.
and to know that Jane read that novel and was like, I'm going to steal this passionate, this sarcastic voice for my own ends, so to speak. Yeah, I loved it, and I thought, go girl. Just now
Yeah.
that I know,
That's interesting.
I just loved it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, that way it's gonna bother me now because I'm like, oh, I know what it is, and
I know.
I'm having to
Yeah,
search
it's
for it now.
interesting because, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just thinking about how, women, there must have been so many women like that,
Mm-hmm.
whether they were writing or not, their writing wouldn't have survived. I'm just thinking how it struck me doing research for The Beholders and reading diaries and letters of servants, the ones that have survived, and just how sparky and opinionated they are. It's really
Yeah,
interesting, and it's a shame that there isn't more that's readily available.
yeah, and I think it's one of those ones that, particularly in the islands, I think there was an almost kind of an idea of what was expected,
Mm,
an idea of what was considered suitable or acceptable.
very
And
much so.
for her living in Orkney, it must have been even worse because Orkney is such a small place.
Mm,
Um,
very difficult to move out of the life that's been prescribed for you.
Mary Brunton, that's who it was, Mary Brunton.
Ah, right, Mary
And
Brunton.
she also did Emmeline, which is the one that I can't wait to read.
Ah, yes.
Um, and that's who I was thinking of. And so she was an incredible writer in that regard. Like I think my own sarcasm comes from because I don't do sarcasm. Anybody that knows me, I don't get sarcasm at all. I take it as criticism and I'm awful with it. But when I'm writing, my sarcasm comes through and my back chat comes through and my wit comes through and
That's
everyone's like,
interesting.
how can you not do that in real life? And I'm like,
So
I
does
don't
it
know.
come through characters?
It comes through the characters. It just
Yeah.
and a lot of the characters I write are parts of me, are parts of my history that I've brought to life.
Mm.
I always say
It's
writing's the
interesting that,
greatest
you
therapy
had to
you'll
write
ever
a
have.
character to kind of get back to yourself, those bits of
Yeah,
you.
it's a really good way, especially with like when I hit sort of 19, 20, I had to change my life and how I was living and how I was operating because I have rheumatoid arthritis. So it had come back, and I was like, well, how do I now live the life that I want to live? And I essentially started writing these stories and living the life I wanted through the characters, and being like, let I might not be able to get out of the ward for 3 months, but hey, I can go to LA and I can do stuff in LA, like I can
Yeah, go
pretend
anywhere
to
in
be
your
there
mind.
for a while.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
and that was a lot of escapism for me. Do you get that escapism feeling when you're writing? Like you get to just forget what's happening right now and just be
Yeah, I
elsewhere.
find it completely consuming. It's quite weird because I find that when I'm in it, everything else falls away and you sort of step outside of time
You
and
do,
nothing else really matters. But I find that I kind of forget that when I step away from it.
yeah.
And those are the times I think, oh gosh, what am I doing with my life?
Yep,
Is it
yep.
worth it? What, spending all
I
these
always
hours and
feel I
hours
always feel
and hours?
guilty.
What am I
Yeah, I
doing?
always feel
And then the
guilty
moment I'm back
because
in it, yeah,
yeah, it's like there's a
it all
guilt
makes sense.
to it. Like I call it the author guilt, where you're having a conversation with your best friend, but in your mind, you're thinking about the story that you're writing at home, or the next one you're wanting to do, or the
Yeah,
next idea that's just sitting there, just waiting for you to like pick it up and run away with it. Um, and I always
yeah. I
say
have
that because my
moments
best friend,
where
I'm
I
like,
have a certain idea, and then yeah, it's kind of like you're kind
yeah,
of itching to get it down onto your phone really quickly or something, because you know it'll go.
I've started sitting with a notebook at hers,
Yeah,
and I have it next to me, and she knows like if my hand's secretly moving, it's because I'm making notes
just
on
give me a
something, and
moment.
she just goes with it now. She's just like, oh, it's Crystal being Crystal, like she's writing. She's got an idea. At least she's writing. Because when I'm not writing, apparently I'm absolutely miserable to be around. Um,
hmm
gotta love it when
Yeah,
the
it is. I
yeah,
droop. I just
miserable.
wilt if I'm not doing it. I can't. Yeah, it is something that seems to drive us.
Yeah,
It's strange, strange thing.
it's a beautiful thing, but it's also a
Mhm.
curse at the same time.
Yeah,
So what
yeah.
can the fans and the readers look forward to? What are you working on that you're excited and passionate about at the moment?
Well, the next project I'm doing.
Yeah.
So that again, it's Victorian. I'm sticking
Hmm.
historical, similar periods of 1880s, and I'm interested in the clash in that time between
Oh,
the two different worlds. 'Cause, science was coming up in Victorian times. It was when they were really
yeah.
sort of leaning into the rational approach to the world, and then there was also this incredible spiritualist movement that was happening at the same time. So I have my character, she's brought up by a spiritualist who is actually for most of her time a charlatan but does
Oh, okay.
claim to have real second
Powers.
sight and that sort of
Yeah.
thing, yeah. But basically uses my character and won't tell her who her parents are, if she's her mother or what. She just says she came from
Oh,
the spirits. And
yeah.
so my heroine, she ends up managing to get away. She escapes. She ends up working for an archaeologist and becomes an archaeologist herself, which was no mean feat for a woman at her time.
Hmm.
But she cannot escape this other world. It comes to her through the dig she's working on
Yeah.
and all the folklore around it, and then this whole spiritualist world, which she has rejected but cannot completely convince herself there isn't anything in it, comes
Yeah.
back to haunt her as well. So she's kind of struggling, being pulled between these two, as she sees it, separate and disparate things. So that's a
I
lot of
love
fun
that.
at the moment. I'm really enjoying
I
doing the
can't wait
reading
to
around
read
that.
that. I will be waiting by the letterbox being like, I hope she sends it
Yes,
to
it
me.
will.
Ah.
As soon as it's
And
done.
we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about that. 'Cause I adore Victorian period times. Anything Victorian, you've got me.
It's
Um,
such a great period.
and it's
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 so
also
similar to us and so not similar at the same time.
yeah, and I think Victorian times was a really big time for Shetland people as well because
Mm,
we were almost like the Vikings for like it was the Viking community for so long, and then
mm,
I'd been Scotland goddess kind of about that time where, we were given as a gift to the Scottish royal family. And it was almost like a complete change of worlds for them
mm,
because they had a fort that was built and then there was, the the whole town was kind of essentially rebuilt in this idea of what this secret island could be. And I think the idea
mm,
was to have the Scottish royal family stay there. So they were essentially building these phenomenal buildings for this this idea that it would be like a place for the royal family to go to and be safe and protected and to have that time. And instead, they were forgotten about, and
Right.
all that traditional sort of Victorian architecture and that dark, like stone built buildings that rise out of the sea like magic just dominates landscape there now, and it just has such an amazing magical draw to everybody. I think it's that's why I love that period, because that was a change. It was a huge change in Shetland, and they didn't have another big change until the 70s when they got oil for the first time.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, seeing like the landmarks of how my community changed over the decades.
Yeah. What a
And we're
legacy.
really big into history up there. Like,
Yeah.
I
Well,
think the
there's so much
Viking
of it.
part of it is just so strong that we're all like, we want to know everything we can, and everybody in the islands travels and they go visit countries so that they can learn about it. But they're also spreading this message of come see Shetland. You know, we're all like little campaigners in a sense.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of the island and like how well it's changed, and it keeps surviving no matter the tests and punishments it's thrown. It just keeps finding ways to keep
Yeah, I
moving
remember
forward.
reading, I won't be able to remember who wrote it or what it was called, but it was I think it was someone from Shetland, and he was talking about how Shetland, that people have sort of passed through Shetland over the years and centuries, sort of different people have come through it, but they're always Shetlanders because the actual place itself is so powerful and has such an impact on whoever lives there. You cannot, it changes you. You can't really change it that much.
It's very true. Yeah. It's like, I always describe it as somebody secretly attaches an elastic band to your backside. And no matter how hard you fight and how long you stay away, eventually that band pings and you end up, before you know it, sitting in the island like,
home.
When did this happen? Why am I here? You know, you just have that moment where you get, I almost call it homesickness, but it's not. It's like this desire just takes over and you have to go back and you have no logical explanation for it. You just drop everything and you just go. And then I've
It
seen
owns you.
people that haven't been back in decades, and then all of a sudden they are literally just packing everything and they're just going home for a while. And it's always been that kind of, we call it true north. True north is true love in Shetland. And we always say, you know, if you're ever lost, go north to your home. And no matter where I live, like, there's this huge part of me that says Shetland's home. Shetland will always be home, no matter how bad it gets or what I have to do in life. That's the place that will always be home, and I love that. I adore that part. And I think that's, if everyone could feel that way about where they've grown up and they've gotten to live their dreams, I think that is probably the most special gift that the world can give you.
Yeah, that is lovely.
So what are you reading that's making you excited right now? What's got you itching to turn
There's a few things. I've just finished Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang, I think it is. And that's really fun. That's just a really, really fun read. And especially from a writing point of view, because it's about a struggling writer who steals the first draft of her much more successful friend of her latest book, because her friend dies, and passes it off as her own, and then obviously bad things happen. But it's such a great idea, and in it she explores all the things in publishing, I think, that have irritated her or confused her or baffled her. So I found myself almost reading it like a handbook, because I'm new to this completely, and thinking, because I don't know how publishing works or how the whole machinery kind of comes together.
Of course,
so I was like, okay, so don't do that on social media, and you can expect this.
There's a lot of people learning that the hard way. I've seen a career die before it even gets started because they went on and had an argument with an art reader, and I'm like, no, girl, no, what are you doing? No, don't never read your bad reviews. You know?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure you can just fall down a hole and total obsession.
You go into a rabbit hole that you just don't come out of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stepping over that for sure.
Never good. Never good. And I always say that. Like, this is my first piece of advice when somebody tells me, oh, I'm going to be published soon. And I'm like, okay, this is what you don't do. Don't get Goodreads. Don't go on social media and read your bad reviews. Just don't.
Yeah, I think, I'm just going to sidestep that. I think it must be really overwhelming if you do it.
Yeah,
And good for
it
you.
is. Like, I've had the could not finish reviews. I've had the reviews where they just tear it apart. And I always say, like, it's not worth it because you put your heart and soul into it. You've given them the best product you can give them. And if they don't like it, they don't like it. You can't change that. You can't change that opinion. So there's no
Exactly.
point in
And I
arguing
kind of
with
feel
it.
like,
Just
you still
go with
own
it.
those hours of their life, though.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, but you
they
just
live
have
away,
to
they belong to
understand.
you,
Yeah,
whatever they thought.
yeah, exactly. And that's always the best piece of advice I always say to people. And don't get too wound up on it. Don't focus too much on it. Just kind of go with it and see what happens. And I always say enjoy this as much as you can because you never
Yeah.
know. Like, the time flies so fast, and enjoy like conversations with readers. Like, take the time, have that 5 minutes or whatever with coffee or just standing outside a hotel. Have that 5 minutes because you never know if that's ever going to last or if you're ever going to have the opportunity again. And I always say grab it with both hands and enjoy it every step of the way. And
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah, I
more than
think,
worth it. More than
yeah.
worth it. Well, you survived the Book and Life podcast. That's it.
Oh, woohoo!
I told you it flies by. You have the most fun ever, and it's refreshing because it's just a conversation with people. It's just an opportunity to let loose and to relax, and everybody understands media is a nightmare. So yeah, it's
Yeah, and
good.
it's just lovely to, chat books.
So guys, come back next week as we have another fantastic guest on. And we're getting the podcast rolling again. So there's always somebody new on, always something exciting to listen to. But please be safe, guys, out there with the storms and with all the different things happening in the world. And just remember, a book is only as far away as you can reach. So make sure you pick up a copy of Hester's book because it sounds like a number one bestseller, and I will be praying that it is. And yeah, have a good week, guys.